overrun by Cabane. The train crashes through the city gates, causing massive destruction, fire, and chaos. Cabane flood the city and starts slaughtering people. Ikoma breaks out of jail and rushes to his lab. Meanwhile, the city's ruler only allows select people to escape on the train, but strict inspections are mandatory. Ikoma cuts his hand, knowing that Cabane are attracted to blood. As one of them approaches, he attacks it with his special steam gun. Unlike regular guns, this weapon actually breaks through a Cabane's iron-covered heart. Overjoyed, Ikoma shouts, "Humans now have a weapon that can kill Cabane," but suddenly, he feels pain in his hand. He had already been bitten by a Cabane earlier. Everything he had done at the beginning was his way of stopping the virus from spreading. Meanwhile, Mume faces off against a Cabane. She removes a band from her neck, delivers a powerful kick that blows the Cabane's head off, but forgets to retrieve her shoe. A whole horde of Cabane stands in the corner, mumbles a few words, and falls asleep, exhausted. But under her cloak, a terrifying truth is revealed. Her face bears the telltale markings of a Cabane. Meanwhile, just as Champel retrieves the train's key and sets it in motion, disaster strikes again. Guards scream in horror. The Cabane have returned in overwhelming numbers. The train's crew frantically seals the doors as the relentless horde pounds against the barriers. In the chaos, Samurai Raichi falls, and the train's boiler takes damage, threatening an explosion. Elsewhere, in Ikoma's carriage, a steam pipe suddenly bursts, nearly crushing civilians. Ikoma heroically catches it with ease, setting it back in place. But when another man accidentally touches the hot metal and recoils in agony, he's left questioning. How did Ikoma withstand the heat? Just as this realization sets in, the true terror begins. Champel's father, Raichi, yanks Champel back onto the train and, despite the pain, orders the Cabane to be crushed, including the Lord himself. Little does he know, this disaster strikes. The mechanism is jammed. A closer look reveals the cause. Champel's father's corpse is lodged in the gears. Someone must leave the train to manually release the switch, but just as the plan forms, the train violently shakes. Swarms of Cabane emerge from the darkness, surrounding the train in a frenzied assault. The situation spirals out of control. If the train doesn't move soon, the overheated boiler could explode on the spot. Unnamed follows up. Infused body heals at an extraordinary rate. Sure enough, by the time Ikoma regains consciousness, his injuries have vanished. "You've got a decent body," Unnamed remarks, "but zero fighting skills, and you lost your only weapon. So until we reach Kongokaku, I'm going to train you. You'll be my meat shield." Ikoma protests, but before he can finish his sentence, Unnamed suddenly senses the presence of a Cabane. Without hesitation, he grabs his blade and dashes into the next carriage. Panic erupts as the passengers see him, fearing the worst. However, there is no Cabane, only a man harassing a pregnant woman. The commotion draws the attention of Raichi, who, assuming an attack is happening, immediately prepares to shoot both Ikoma and Unnamed for violating the rules. Before tensions can escalate further, an engineer rushes in, reporting that the train's water tank is severely damaged. A stop is necessary for overnight repairs. With no other choice, Ikoma and Unnamed return to their carriage, staring out the small window at the night sky, while the passengers gather around a bonfire to honor the dead. Despite the warriors' vigilance, a grave mistake is made. Among the crowd, the pregnant woman clutches her chest, feeling an unnatural tremor. It's the infection. She realizes she has turned, but remains silent, unwilling to endanger her unborn child. Meanwhile, Ikoma and Unnamed suddenly find themselves surrounded by a group of armed civilians, intending to eliminate them in their sleep. Fortunately, Champely arrives in time to defuse the situation. However, sensing something off, Unnamed slips away unnoticed. Down below, a group of men corner him again, still seeing him as a threat. To prove their innocence, Champel does the unthinkable. He stabs Ikoma in front of everyone. Ikoma refuses to fight back, firmly stating that the only enemy is the Cabane. His unwavering resolve finally earns the people's trust, but the effort takes its toll. Ikoma collapses from blood loss. Meanwhile, Unnamed has already bonded with the local children, but chaos erupts once more. The pregnant woman fully transforms into a Cabane. Screams echo in the night as terrified civilians scatter in all directions. Unnamed swiftly removes the silk band from his neck, dodging the warrior's blade with ease before executing a clean and decisive strike to eliminate the Cabane. Though reluctant, he knows that Cabane must be eradicated. Meanwhile, in another carriage, Ikoma, having lost too much blood, loses his senses and pins Champel down, attempting to take a bite. Just as the situation turns dire, Raichi arrives and knocks him out in one swift move. Although Ikoma had no ill intentions, this incident cements everyone's suspicions about him. As fate would have it, the train is soon attacked by a swarm of Cabane. The terrified civilians rush back to the train, but Ikoma and Unnamed are once again locked in the last carriage. After ensuring safety, Champel carefully checks himself and finds no wounds. However, his trust in Ikoma is shattered. With no other choice, Champel hands over the keys to the pseudo-iron fortress. The new leadership wastes no time. They immediately imprison Ikoma and his allies in the last carriage, planning to detach it entirely. But just as they prepared, it collapsed, unable to continue fighting. The warriors desperately opened fire to cover him, but the hail of bullets was useless. None could penetrate the Cabane's defenses. At this moment, they realized how crucial Ikoma's specialized weapon would have been. Meanwhile, Ikoma and Unnamed had managed to escape from their locked carriage. Timing their movement with the train's exit from the tunnel, they rushed forward, cutting down every Cabane Kabane in their way. Ikoma's specialized weapon, combined with unnamed combat skills, made quick work of the enemies on the train roof. However, both of them were hard, finally eliminating the threat. With the enemy vanquished, the people on the train were saved. Ikoma and Unnamed had finally earned the passengers' trust. To strengthen Reichi's blade against future battles, Ikoma decided to coat it with the Kabane's heart membrane, making it nearly unbreakable. He also modified the warriors' air rifles, increasing their power to the point where they could even pierce through steel plates. However, whether these improvements would truly be effective could only be determined in battle. Their next obstacle was a massive barricade blocking the tracks, something a monstrous entity had seemingly destroyed on purpose. And if a ruined train station was ahead, Kabane were surely lurking within. Ikoma led a small team of warriors toward the crane needed to clear the path. To avoid alerting the Kabane, they took a long detour, while the pseudo-Iron Fortress train started moving, ensuring they could board once their mission was complete. However, Unnamed found the plan too troublesome. Instead of sneaking around, she did the room, convinced that this was the Kabane's main nest. If he could eliminate them all, wouldn't that solve everything? This reckless move made Ikoma and the others break into a cold sweat. As expected, the room was swarming with at least hundreds of Kabane. The resulting explosion left only a handful of didn't pay immediately shot down. Ikoma ordered the crane operator, a chubby man, to retreat to the Iron Fortress immediately. There was no time for him to start the crane. Ikoma decided to stay behind and control it himself. After all, as a Kabaneri, being bitten wasn't a concern unless it was fatal. But with this many Kabane, death was almost certain. He had to finish the job quickly and escape to the train. Meanwhile, Unnamed was still fighting, but exhaustion was overtaking him, pushing him dangerously close to dormancy. To make matters worse, he encountered a Kabane and stronger. Mumei recognized this creature right away. She called it a Blackhawk, a fusion-type Kabane with a unique core. Its heart was made up of a special Kabane, and if they could take it down, the entire creature would self-destruct. The problem was that ordinary bullets couldn't even pierce its outer shell. Fortunately, they had scavenged some second-hand weapons from the train station, and Mumei was convinced they could work. As the train restarted, the fully fed Blackhawk made its move once again. The monstrous horde charged forward, one side desperately running while the other pursued relentlessly. Meanwhile, the Italian cannon was finally in position, but instead of Ikoma, it was his good buddy Fatty operating it. He had strict orders to fire only when the Blackhawk got as close as possible, but in his panic, he misfired early. The explosion was spectacular, no doubt, but this was far from what they had planned. Now, both the Blackhawk and the creatures on the train were enraged. Even Biba, bandages and all. Miraculously, the train stabilized, truly a legendary moment. Later, a man fired a single shot at a thick steel plate, piercing clean through its half-meter thickness. Such a powerful weapon was immediately gifted to the city's ruler, whose eyes lit up like he had just found treasure. This city was one of the few safe havens left in the world, but its weapons couldn't penetrate a Kabane's ironclad heart. Now, with Ikoma's firearm, everything was about to change. Champ even handed over the blueprints, securing a warm welcome for the Kabaneri train. For the first time in ages, the people of Kotetsuju felt true relief. Food was plentiful, they could finally take a hot bath after months, and even the audience, yes, me, got to witness Mumei changing clothes on screen. That night, Mumei found Ikoma. It was the Chishi festival, a day of wishes and confessions. At last, Mumei revealed her true name, her old rice every day. When it was time to make a wish that night, Mumei wished for exactly that, to eat rice every day. Ikoma, on the other hand, boldly declared his goal, to eradicate all Kabane, reclaim lost lands, and restore Mumei's humanity so she would never have to rely on blood again. When it was Reichi's turn to share his wish, he chickened out, no matter how much Champ pressured him. His face turned as red as an apple. His wish was probably to marry Champ. As for Fatty, his dream was even wilder. He wanted 3 wives. The group laughed and celebrated, momentarily armed. According to rumors, wherever they went, the Kabane were completely eradicated without exception. Their leader was a man named Biba. The moment Mumei saw him, she ran straight to him, because Biba was her older brother. That explained why the people of Kotetsuju had always obeyed Mumei without question. But Ikoma's instincts screamed at him. This man was dangerous. After all, it was Biba who had instilled in Mumei the belief that power was everything, turning her into a Kabaneri in the first place. Without hesitation, Ikoma confronted Biba directly. However, Biba simply sent Mumei away for a medical checkup and sat down to talk with Ikoma and the others. Yet, before their conversation could go far, their train suffered a malfunction. Displaying the image of a noble leader, his ambitions slowly became evident. Meanwhile, Biba's subordinates were already causing trouble. One of them tried to confiscate Reichi's katana. When he refused, the man immediately stabbed Champ. Reichi couldn't just stand by, but Biba pretended it was no big deal, casually saying he had only killed a spider, a clear provocation. There was no chance of peaceful coexistence. At that moment, a massive swarm of Kabane began scaling the city walls. The samurai were stunned. This city had never been attacked by so many Kabane at once. It turned out someone had deliberately released people covered in fresh blood to lure them in. With the Kabane invasion at its peak, the Shofang sect seized the opportunity to show off their strength. Because the enemy was too close, the Kabaneri train couldn't use its heavy weaponry, leaving only Ikoma, resistant to Kabane bites, to fight on the drawbridge was suddenly lowered. Biba's train charged rushed out of the city without looking back, as the doors of its cars slowly were either burned to ashes or blown apart instantly. The Shofang sect even had a cavalry unit, fully armed, highly disciplined, and ruthless. The moment one of them was bitten, they committed suicide without hesitation. With such an overwhelming assault, the Kebane were massacred. For a moment, it became unclear who the real villains were. Even the samurai on the city walls were left in stunned silence. While Biba's forces wiped out the Kabane, Ikoma fought as well, but every move he made was being observed by a grinning scientist under Biba's command. The scientist had seen many modified Kabaneri like Mume, but a wild one like Ikoma? That was something new. Suddenly, a small hybrid Kabane appeared, swiftly eliminating the hybrid Kabane with flawless teamwork. At that moment, one of Biba's subordinates suddenly turned traitor, attempting to assassinate him. But Biba had seen far too many betrayals before. Biba wasted no time. Without hesitation, he killed the traitor on the spot, and he didn't spare the mastermind behind the betrayal either. However, Ikoma found it increasingly difficult to stomach Biba's casual killing. Just as he was about to confront him, Fatty stopped him. Surprisingly, Biba generously offered to escort the Kutetsujo safely to Kongukaku. Hearing this, Champa was overjoyed and agreed immediately. The passengers on the train felt relieved, thinking that with Biba's protection, they were finally safe. But in reality, Biba had other plans. Inside his train, he was secretly keeping a large number of captive Kabane and conducting twisted experiments on them. His true goal was far more sinister. He planned to release Kabane into the city on purpose, and to achieve this monstrous objective, he was willing to ignore even his own sister, Mume. That day, the city lord, known for his extreme caution, only allowed women and children from Biba's group into the city for negotiations. Ironically, this played right into Biba's hands. Mume and another girl named Miyuko both took them down and dashed toward the city gates. Ikoma, over the city walls, knocked out the guards and pulled the drawbridge lever. She then signaled to her allies outside, thinking she had successfully allowed Biba's train into the city. But what actually arrived was not the train. It was an endless horde of Kabane. To her horror, Mume realized that Biba's men were using fresh blood to lure them in. She had unknowingly doomed the city. Ikoma tried to raise the drawbridge again, but a man suddenly sliced off his wrist. As the city had descended into madness, screams echoed through the streets as blood and flames consumed everything. Without the keys, the Kotetsuju was unable to depart, forcing Ikoma and the others to join the samurai in their desperate battle against the Kabane. Meanwhile, Raichi set out to rescue Champa, only to see him being taken away by Biba's men. Mume, devastated by what she had done, sought out her brother to understand his motives. On the way, she saved a mother and child from an attacking Kabane, kicking the creature away. But it was too late. The child had already been bitten, and the mother, overwhelmed with grief, made a heart-wrenching decision. She held her child tightly and detonated an explosive, taking both their lives. Mume could only stand there, frozen in shock, unable to do anything. Meanwhile, Biba's train had entered the city. The desperate survivors believed he had come to save them. In a frantic rush, they scrambled to climb the ladders onto the train. But just as they reached the top, the ladders were suddenly a gunshot echoed. The ladder snapped in half. Screams filled the air as those clinging to it plummeted to the ground, their bodies crashing onto the stone pavement. Blood splattered everywhere. Then, with a single command, Biba's warriors aimed their rifles downward and opened fire. Bullets rained down mercilessly on the wounded and terrified survivors. They too were once believers in survival, clinging to the rules of this cruel world. But now, they showed no hesitation in slaughtering their own kind. This, however, was only the beginning. Elsewhere, Biba had finally succeeded. He had extracted the Black Channel, and comment part 2 below. As soon as we get enough comments, we'll upload part 2 right away.